Hey, folks, this podcast is sponsored by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so they can treat their career like a business. As I've said before, had David King Arthur McElroy on this podcast. That was a great episode. Go check it out, where we discuss King Arthur Capital Group and financial issues that are pervasive through combat sports. Very excited to be partnered with King Arthur Capital Group and share that information with as many people as possible. Um, so, if you're a fighter or, someone in the combat sports business looking to make your career work a little easier for you, looking just to manage the finances in your life a little smarter, hit up King Arthur Capital Group on Instagram at King Arthur Capital Group. Also, this podcast is brought to you by Fight Club Crate, mystery fight gear, knockout prices, undisputed value, combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 at Fight Club Crate for 15% off of your first purchase. And you can follow those folks on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. Very cool stuff that they package together, a wide variety of products in the combat sports world. They're always looking for new, unique products to include in those monthly boxes. And that is finally a consistent winner of a gift idea for the combat connoisseur in your life. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 208 of the Tap That MMA podcast. Looking forward to UFC Vegas 116 on Saturday.
What's up, guys? Make sure you tune in to watch me, the Funk Master, April 25th, main event taking on Yusuf Zalal. Super excited. This one's going to be a banger. High-level chess match. I'm coming for the win. I'm coming for the finish. Let's get it.
And, folks, another combat sports action this weekend. BKFC, Tough Enough, Lux, that all happened tonight. On UFC Fight Pass, or not BKFC, but the other one's UFC Fight Pass. There's Octagon 87, Cage Warriors 205 tomorrow afternoon, Saturday afternoon. Next week, there's one Samurai on like Wednesday. Inoue versus Nakatani. PFL Sioux Falls. For my picks and all that stuff and more, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Check out all the recent interlude episodes that I've put out. I'm going to start rolling out some of the older ones as they become a little bit more relevant, as some of those people get some new fights and whatnot. And have more interlude episodes on the books, even for, the next few days. So be on the lookout for those. Those are always very interesting conversations and whatnot. Um, Check out my UFL gambling content too, as we are entering week 5 of the UFL season. I post those on Twitter. I post like separate blog posts that I make, anywhere that I can. So check those out if you're into spring/alternative football. Rocking the Louisville Kings shirt today, as poorly as things are going for them in the first season of their franchise. And yeah, I was out last week on at a work conference in San Diego, so had to adjust the stuff I was putting out a little bit back more to business as usual this week, and hopefully that's how it continues until some of the activities coming up in my life ramp up. We're having a house built. My wife's pregnant for the second time, so it's going to be a busy rest of 2026. But with that, we've got 13 fights for UFC Vegas 116 starting at 5 p.m. Saturday, which is going to be like today when this comes out. Um, Obviously on Paramount Plus, this is happening at the UFC Apex, and we start off with Talita Alansar against Julia Palastri at strawweight. Um, Julia Palastri is the minus 240 favorite. Talita Alansar at the plus 205 underdog. I'm recording this late, so let's try to work through these. Um, I had a problem working past Talita, the problem child, as such a big underdog. She is coming off 2 straight wins, and she took down Vanessa Demopoulos 4 times, but Vanessa Demopoulos sometimes is quite happy to be there, and The win over Ryan Dos Santos and Carnelossi, that's not bad. She's able to get some volume takedowns at times. She had the two fights with Stephanie Luciano. What I see being the issue here is the same issue that she did have with Stephanie Luciano. So, in talking about Julia Pilastri, she's 8 years younger. She's also going to have, if you can believe it, she's 1 inch taller, but she has a 6 inch reach advantage. Um, and Julia Pilastri, was 1-1 on the Contender Series. In total in the UFC, she's 2-2. Losses to Josephine Knudsen, who outstruck her 124 to 64. Pilastri landed 3 takedowns, and then against Lupe Godinez, which, you know, looking back, it's not that bad at all. With the wins that Lupe has had in the UFC, she's coming off a win over Carolina Kovalevich. She got the knockout in that one. What I like about Julia Pilastri is like Jasmine on the Contender Series was able to take her down 4 times and got a unanimous decision. I think it was still like 29-28. Against Lupe, it was 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. Against Knudsen, it was 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. And in the fights on the Contender Series that she won, and the fight against Corey McKenna that she won, Carolina Kovalevich, she got taken down in some of those, but she had the volume striking too. She looks for finishes pretty well. And while she had issues with the takedowns from Lupe and from not from Josephine Knudsen, but from Jasmine, I don't think Talita Alensar is approaching the level of those two fighters. I don't think Talita Alensar is going to be able to have her way with Julia Pilastri on the feet like Josephine Knudsen was able to do. Um, Corey McKenna is a good measuring stick, I think. Josephine Knudsen just took her first loss in the that was now December 2024, but she only has one loss in the UFC and is 8-1 as a pro. So she might have tiny issues with some of the same things with Talita that she did with Lupe and Jasmine. But I don't think Talita is going to be able to execute nearly as well. Julia Pilastri, has with what she's demonstrated in her 3 wins from the Contender Series onward, skill set wise, the size advantage and the youth advantage that she has. I favor Psycho Pilastri here. Um, I ended up using it like I ended up doing a parlay with Julia and a few people. I posted my bets already on Instagram and on Twitter. Um, you know, I think gun to my head, I would say Julia Pilastri by decision. That's -110. Not bad. Hit it. Next up, we've got a welterweight matchup between Max Griffin and Victor Valenzuela. So, Victor Valenzuela, let's start with him. 13-4 as a professional, 32 years old, 2 losses by knockout, 1 by submission. He's never lost in the distance. Got knocked out by Michael Oliveira on the Contender Series last October. He's coming off of a knockout win over Yusaku Kinoshita and Lamino Shudo 4 back in March. He was a Fury FC interim welterweight champion. You like to say he was in Combate for a good amount of time. Every loss he's ever taken has been a finish, and his pro career actually dates back to 2013. He actually lost one of his fights before Michael Oliveira by a legal head kick. A legal head kick. Well, on the ground, it seems important. But Max Griffin. So Max Griffin obviously is 41 years old. That's old. Now he will have a 5 inch reach advantage. He's 2 inches taller. And Max Griffin, his last win in the UFC was actually against Jeremiah Wells, February 2024 by split decision. Wells actually had a good record in the UFC. He didn't fight great competition. Um, But I mean, you look back at the last losses for Max Griffin that like actually happened in recent years. A split decision loss to Neil Magny. He didn't get knocked out by Michael Morales. And actually, it was 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards, July 2023. Last two losses, he got submitted by Michael Chiesa. All right, well, that happens. That was on a four-fight win streak to close out Chiesa's career. And then Max Griffin had a split decision loss to Chris the Action Man Curtis. Um, so Max Griffin, a guy that's been in the UFC since 2016, he's 41 years old. He's fought a lot of really good guys at welterweight, and has remained competitive, against pretty good competition. He didn't get finished and knocked out by Michael Morales. I don't know if he's ever been knocked out in the UFC. Actually, in his first fight against Colby Covington in the UFC, it was the only knockout loss. Otherwise, he's been incredibly hard to finish, and um, I think he's only been submitted like once. So he's only been finished twice in the UFC, and there's so many split and majority decisions, wins and losses here. So I actually like Max Griffin as an underdog plus 110. This is a lot of experience for a guy like Valenzuela to handle in a UFC debut. But also, like, goes the distance minus 150. Griffin by decision plus 225. I think that makes the most sense for Max Griffin. I think Valenzuela by decision plus 180 makes the most sense for him. But also, Max Griffin to cover 3.5 points is minus 150. That makes a lot of sense. And for Max Griffin by split decision plus 850, Valenzuela by split decision plus 750. I think you got to give a look to all those with the career trajectory of Max Griffin or the career track record. Still at 41, very hard to finish, has been competitive in fights against competitive fighters. And when it goes the distance, there ends up being some confusion among the judges as to who actually won. Next up. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Francis Marshall and Lucas Skywalker Brennan. I love this one. All right. Lucas Brennan plus 375. I got him at plus 400. Francis Marshall minus 500. Hold on. Francis Marshall? What is it? Minus 500? Francis Marshall has won two of his last three fights, a split decision over Dennis Bajukka and a rear naked choke over Eric Silva. Eric Silva is like nearly 40 years old, and that was his second fight in like 4 years in the UFC. It was very weird timing with Eric Silva. But so how much did those two wins mean to me? He was able to rock Dennis Bajukka, wasn't able to finish him. It was a very close decision. Bajukka, a guy that was 1-1 of the Contender Series and 1-4 in the UFC. Lost to Isaac Dulgarian, a split decision loss to William Gomez. Because of the grappling advantage. That's how a lot of William Gomez decisions end up going. So he's lost three of his last five fights after winning on the Contender Series and then winning his UFC debut over Marcelo Rojo. Now, Lucas Skywalker Brennan is actually younger than Francis Marshall, born in 2000. He is, I believe, he's 1 inch taller, but has a 1 inch reach disadvantage. He is a southpaw. And the thing about Lucas Brennan is I've had his dad, UFC veteran, MMA veteran overall, Chris Brennan, on this podcast. Go check out that interlude episode if you haven't gotten the chance. And Lucas Brennan, I don't know why he's so slept on coming into this when his opponent's going to be Francis Marshall. So 25 years old, 2 wins by knockout, 8 by submission, 1 win by decision. Both of his career losses are by decision. 9-0 career in Bellator, 2019 to 2023. Lost his only fight in PFL. So this is a guy that in his amateur career, got going pretty quick. So it was 2017 was when that started. Like 9 years ago. Like, so what? He was 16 when he was an amateur. And in LFA amateur, one in Tough Enough amateur. Pro career starts off right with Bellator, is fighting fighters with winning records as of his third pro fight in Bellator. Um, and got a lot of interesting submission victories there. An anaconda, an assassin choke. Um, but the last two opponents that he had in Bellator had records of a combined record of 16-5. He lost two straight decisions in 2024 by unanimous decision to Dimitri Ivy in PFL, and then by split decision to Mauricio Gomez, December of 2024 at Fury FC 99. And since then, he's won two straight, both by rear naked choke over Austin Coleman at XKO 70 and over Joshua Weems at XKO 71 last October. Joshua Weems, not a guy that's necessarily UFC level, but he's a good measuring stick. He's fought a lot of guys that have then taken that next step after beating him. Look, this is very similar. It, it's kind of like Lance Gibson versus Bobby Green, except Francis Marshall is way further away from being Bobby Green than Lucas Brennan is from being Lance Gibson. In fact, they have some interesting, things in common. Their dads being in the UFC, a while ago. Um, and, being underdogs coming into this. I for the record that he has in Bellator, for his only losses being by decision, one being that close split decision. Um, even if you don't give Bellator much credit, and you should, there's enough quality here for a guy that's 25 who's been fighting, at least as an amateur since he was 16 years old. Because of his dad and because of his brother, who's also an up and coming fighter, that this guy's probably improving at a good clip. It's probably going to be hard to submit Francis Marshall. It might be hard to finish Francis Marshall, but I trust in Lucas Brennan from his career track record before the UFC. Why am I supposed to think Francis Marshall is so special in this instance? I got him at plus 400, at plus 375 all day. Give me Lucas Skywalker Brennan. Hit it. And Francis Marshall, you might be the favorite, but I have to say,
Oh God, take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
next up, that's one of my favorite underdog picks. I use Lucas Brennan in some of my DFS lineups too, which I can show off at the end. Flyweight, Rafael Filo against Cody Durden. Cody Durden is the plus 475 underdog. Rafael Filo, the minus 650 favorite. Now, once upon a time, not even that long ago, like a couple years, if Cody Durden has an underdog in one of these matchups that he gets at flyweight, I'd be all over it. And I think I probably was in, maybe against Charles Johnson, maybe against, Carlos Mota and Jake Hadley and Matt Schnell, but also I was probably saying that against Tajir and Bruno Silva and maybe Joshua Van and like I kept thinking like Cody Durden is a dog. He likes to scrap. He can wrestle a bit. And then he just kept getting finished. He's flyweight. People might not like it. I don't know what the public sentiment is. As of right now, flyweight remains my favorite division in the UFC. And all these matchups is just like, God, there's no breaks. And against Namjargo Timon his last fight back in March, that was the one where you're hoping like you can get back on track. Because that wasn't necessarily against like a killer at flyweight. I mean, he's kind of turning that around now. Nimjargo has been winning a lot, but a lot of that is like road to UFC stuff leading up to this Cody Durden fight. And Cody Durden just keeps getting, thoroughly beaten and finished. And, the fights might be entertaining, but he has now lost six of his last seven fights. He has one win since August of 2023. That speaks to his level of activity, but I can't give him all that credit for, the wins over Charles Johnson and Jake Hadley and Matt Schnell in a row anymore. Too much time has passed and we've seen too much. Rafael Filo, his only two losses in the UFC are to Muhammad Makayev, who got him by neck crank, and against Alan Nascimento by unanimous decision. They had 13 minutes combined of control time in that fight. Filo landed four takedowns. It was 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. That was a close one. And, Nascimento now on his own four-fight winning streak. And, Filo submitted Clayton Carpenter. That was his last fight back in October. He submitted O'Day Osborne. He submitted Daniel Barrez and got a knockout over Roybert Echeverria on the Contender Series September of 2022. So Filo might have been a guy that I think I used him in DFS a little bit. And I think I just might have straight up used that number minus 650 or something close to it in a parlay. That might have been what I put with Julia Pilastra and something else, a 4 or 5 parlay that I've posted somewhere on Twitter and Instagram. But Filo by submission minus 135 makes the most sense. Um, Nascimento is a guy that like tends to, he can force slower, grindier fights out of people. Fila inside the distance it's only minus 300. So by submission minus 135 is probably your best value, but Fila by knockout is, not outside the realm of possibility either. That's plus 300. And that's at least been two of the losses for Cody Durden over the last couple of years. So I think both of those remain in play. I think Philo to cover the spread is they don't have the spread. So they don't have the spread, but like by submission, by knockout, I don't think this will end up going the distance. Not based on the, recent history for Cody Durden. So unfortunately, Cody Durden, the last, 7 fights for you.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
And this is one that I think Rafael Filo gets, and then Cody Durden's looking at 5 straight losses, and it'll be 7 losses in his last 8 fights. UFC's giving him quite a few chances here. Next up, we've got a women's bantamweight matchup between Mayra Bueno Silva and Michelle Montag. Michelle Montag is the minus 400 favorite. Mayra Bueno Silva, the plus 300 underdog. So to talk about Mayra Bueno Silva first, because it's how quickly things change in this sport. Like she didn't even have her record wasn't amazing starting off in the UFC. Like she beat Jillian Robertson, Romero Barella, okay, but lost to Mariana Moroz. The draw with Montana De La Rosa, decision loss to Manon Farrow, which I'm not gonna, that was naturally at flyweight. I can't knock her too much for that. She did get beaten thoroughly by Farrow October of 2021. But she rattled off those 3 straight wins against Wu Yanan, Stephanie Egger, and Lena Landsberg. She gets that fight night main event against Holly Holm. And it ended in a guillotine, but overall ended up getting overturned, and so now sits as a no contest. After an overturned no contest, she gets the fight for the vacant bantamweight title against Raquel Pennington and loses 49-45, 49-46, 49-46. Since then, got knocked out by Macy Chiasson, lost a decision to Jasmine Jazz Duvicious, lost a decision to Jacqueline Cavalcanti. Those are fighters with, different attributes. Macy hits harder than, some of the average bantamweights. Jacqueline Cavalcanti, is lengthy too and is just really good at, point fighting on the feet over the course of 3 rounds. I guess I have to talk about Michelle Montag, first before I get to that. So Michelle Montag, she's gonna have a 2-inch reach advantage. She's 2 years younger, and she's actually 3 inches taller. 7-0 as a professional. the wild one out of New Zealand. 6 career wins by submission, one by decision. And she was very successful as an amateur in IMMAF, fighting internationally. She won, several of those tournaments. She was the Shuriken ad popped up. She was the Shuriken Fight Series featherweight champion. Her only losses as an amateur were by decision to the same person within less than a year of each other, Sabrina De Sousa, an IMMAF. As a professional, her whole career before her last fight was spent under the PFL banner. So, but she did have one fight in Icon FC. It was her second pro fight. But she fought on PFL Challenger Series a couple of times. So she was in like the PFL featherweight stuff. Ends up submitting Abby Montez, Carolina Sobek, and Marila Moraes in a row. That last PFL fight was August 2024. Then she makes her UFC debut against Luana Carolina. Um, and in that one, Carolina was on a 3-fight winning streak before she fought Michelle Montag. She, had beaten Ivana Petrovic, Lucy Pudilova, and Julia Stoliarenko. Has beaten Lupita Godinez. Her losses are only to recognizable people too. Like she's had good wins in the UFC, but against Michelle Montag, she ends up losing 30-26, 30-25, and 29-26. Michelle Montag controlled for almost 11 minutes of the fight. 5 of 7 on takedowns, outstruck her at 99-75 in total, 28 strikes on the ground. Lost out on these significant strikes, just 48-41. But very impressive UFC debut win for Michelle Montag. And look, like Michelle Montag, she is the one who has won most of her fights by submission. She's not going to be easy to submit, and she's larger. She never fought at flyweight recently. She was fighting at featherweight, and now she's at bantamweight in the UFC. And we saw Alexa Grasso climb out of a hole recently and look like a revitalized version of herself with that scary ass knockout she landed.
Oh God, take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
But things have really been trending in a bad direction for MBS. Not losing these fights necessarily close, like 30-27s, 2 out of 3 against Jacqueline Cavalcanti. Against Jasmine, it was 30-27 across the board. Got finished by Macy. It wasn't really very close with Raquel Pennington. I don't see what the route to victory is from Mayra Buena Silva. And if she's able to get a submission, that's something. But I don't think she'll be able to outstrike Michelle Montag and avoid all the trouble on the ground. Maybe one of those two. And I think if she does one of those two, I don't think it'll be by a significant enough margin to make up for what Michelle Montag is doing on the side where she is having success. So if MBS is able to do, well on the feet against Michelle Montag, I think Michelle Montag is still able to get her down and control her there and score from there. I think it'd be really hard to submit MBS. I don't think she's lost by submission in her entire career. We can check on that real quick. No losses by submission, 7 wins by submission, but 5 losses by decision. So here, Montag minus 400, that might have also been a parlay piece for me. I think you could maybe, I'm not seeing a point spread yet, but you could go Michelle Montag to cover 3.5. Takedowns landed props over 2.5 minus 115 for Michelle Montag. I would say yes to over 2.5. And then, I think Michelle Montag by decision, that's minus 105 makes the most sense. You could be really safe with it and do by submission together, but in a method of victory double chance kind of thing. By submission is plus 300. I just think that's going to be really, unless she really demoralizes Mayra Bueno Silva on the ground and just gets her in a bad position and locks in a rear naked choke, the submission is going to be really tough. That's why maybe you could do, when that point spread, if it's available where you're looking, maybe go for that. But otherwise, I think the most realistic method of victory here is Michelle Montag by decision, hit it. And I believe I used her in DFS a fair amount as well. The thing is, when you use Lucas Brennan in your lineup this week, you have a lot of freedom of how to spend the whole rest of your budget. Next up, we have a middleweight matchup between Jackson McVeigh and Sedriques Dumas. I hated thinking about this fight. Sedriques Dumas is plus 160, the underdog. Jackson McVeigh minus 185, the favorite. Now, you know how I feel about Sedriques Dumas in total over the last few years.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
And Sedriques Dumas and his decision making and the things that he said, the way that he's been going about his life and his fight career.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
But you fight your opponent. The opponent's Jackson McVeigh, 6-2, 27 years old. 3 wins by knockout, 3 by submission. Has never gone the distance. Both of his career losses are by submission. He is 4-0 in LFA. So his amateur career, he ended with some good fights in LFA and whatnot. His only amateur loss was to Wes Schultz, who we've also seen, in fights of this nature by submission. He was the Brawl at Bourbon Street middleweight champion to end his amateur career. As a pro, there's a lot, 4 of his, very few professional fights were with LFA. The, opponents with records of 5-5, 2-5, a 7-13 in Shamrock FC, where he fought twice, 3-2, 4-1. The last guy that he fought in LFA was Mateo Garner, June of 2025, who's 4-2. And Mateo Garner, actually a guy that I've had on this podcast a couple years ago. Love Mateo Garner. But this was close to a year ago. It's been a fast year for Jackson McVeigh. He's had some fights canceled too. And I believe came in it ended up coming in late on some of these UFC fights. Got submitted by Bruno Ferreira in round 1, got submitted by Zachary Reese in round 2 back in November. And then you look at Sedriques Dumas, 6'2", 79-inch reach, born in 1995, 10-4 as a professional with 1 no contest. That came against Zach Reese, September of 2025. He's coming off that guillotine loss to Dante Johnson, who, has now also beaten Cody Brundage. He had that awesome knockout of Darian Abbey on the Contender Series. Dante Johnson, for what we don't know about, he's young, born in 1999. He's 8-0 as a professional. He got knocked out by Mikhail Alexajuk, April of 2025. That's, Alexajuk has now won 3 in a row against increasing levels of competition. Mikhail Alexajuk has looked good over the last year or so. Sedriques Dumas' last win, August of 2024, by decision over Dynasty Llewellyn. I can give you a win over Abu Azatar is a little bit more impressive than the wins against Cody Brundage, which was a terribly slow pace to that fight, and Dynasty Llewellyn. And he lost to Josh Fremd in his real UFC debut, and he got knocked out by Nursultan Ruziboev. His Contender Series fight was really a good one against Montez Pinaz. But Sedriques Dumas, I don't trust that dude's headspace. I don't trust what's between that dude's ears. I have not enjoyed watching him. I've really enjoyed fading him because it was against someone who against someone who isn't the bottom tier of middleweight. Like I didn't see him winning any of those. And I don't know exactly how Sedriques Dumas like would end up winning this fight. McVeigh, I think it's a little bit more clear. Like he's never been the distance. If you're going Jackson McVeigh as the favorite, go, McVeigh to do this inside the distance. Um, that is minus 160. That's not bad, but I mean, it's crazy considering he's just minus 185 money line. But like, how can Sedriques Dumas win this? Survive. Don't get finished. That's the first very important step. And maybe you make it boring. Maybe you do what he's done before. You get some takedowns, get up, clinching and scoring steadily and slowly and painfully that way. Maybe he, lands an opportunistic guillotine if Jackson McVeigh comes in, too hot and isn't careful and ends up, stumbling into a submission. But Jackson McVeigh, we've had the sample of him in the UFC against a better class of middleweight, but not by a huge margin. Um, and so like this one is absolutely in the wheelhouse of Sedriques Dumas. And the thing about those guys with the circuses going on in their brain and everything is like, sometimes they bounce back. A lot of those guys don't, crazy people don't always lose 10 fights in a row. This is a potential bounce back spot for him that's very much within his range. Um, and he's shorter, but he has a longer reach than Jackson McVeigh. He's a little older, but he's obviously more experienced as a professional. He could do it by decision. He could sneak a, submission. I don't know. I don't think we really know what Sedriques Dumas is capable of because how could he possibly have been putting his best effort towards fighting when he's training with ankle monitors and, smoking weed in his car when he's talking to judges or whatever the hell he was doing. But what the hell? I wouldn't take to cover the spread because that's plus 140. And I think if Dumas loses, there's a very good chance that he gets finished. But Dumas money line plus 160. Okay. Against so many of the better instincts inside of me, I will bite. Let's hit it. And how I feel favoring Sedriques Dumas in the UFC in 2026.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Next up, we have another middleweight matchup of a similar tier of the UFC middleweight division, Rodolfo Vieira versus Eric McConaughey. McConaughey is the plus 255 underdog, Vieira the minus 305 favorite. I feel bad because like I liked Eric McConaughey when he got the short notice call to debut in the UFC when I believe he was supposed to fight for the Tough Enough title or something. 10-4 and 1 as a pro, 35 years old, 6 feet tall, 77-inch reach, 4 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 3 by decision. All 4 of his losses are by knockout. But one fight in LFA against a 6-5 opponent, Kevin Felipe, and did some fighting in King of the Cage. Most important, like a good amount of time with Tough Enough. And yeah, he was supposed to fight Buddy Wallace February of 2025. And what I believe was supposed to be for the Tough Enough title. Ends up fighting their Sultan Ruzabov and getting knocked out in the second round. He beat Cody Brundage by split decision in a fight that and it actually ended up being at light heavyweight. I didn't think he won that fight. I actually thought it should have been for Brundage, but perhaps I was biased on that. I forget. There's just like there's some decent wins on the resume of Eric McConaughey. Brundage and Maki Pitolo are, two of the best, and like Tyler Ray would probably be another one, but he's now lost 4 of his last 5 fights, with the only win being over a 7-9 Carlton Little at Limitless Fighting Championships, November of 2024. So McConaughey, like he's coming off a round 3 knockout against Bisanger Sursakayev. who is 11-0. Surshakayev 4-0 in ACA. He's now 2-0 in the UFC. Like Surshakayev is very much the makings of a guy that can rise quickly at middleweight, and he's fighting Jordan Santos at UFC 328. But shit, like McConaughey is not on the right side of his 30s. And you know, every time he's lost, it's been by knockout. And I didn't think, his resume did not scream to me, this guy's UFC ready when he got the call. He got the call because it was convenient. Tough Enough is based out of Las Vegas. That was actually he actually got the call for the Seattle card. But I think the UFC had just been aware of him and was like, yo, like, this guy's competent. He's professional. Otherwise, McConaughey looking at it just does not scream UFC middleweight. And beating Cody Brundage by split decision doesn't change my mind on that. Now, Rodolfo Vieira, it's been up and down for him too, and he's going to have a 4-inch reach disadvantage. They're the same height. He is actually a little bit older, like less than a year older than Eric McConaughey. But I mean, the results and being in the UFC since 2019, and he's won 3 of his last 5 fights. He's lost 2 of his last 3. He lost a close fight to Andre Petrosky February of 2025. It was 29-28 on all 3 scorecards. He beat Tresean Gore by decision August of 2025, who's coming off that guillotine win over Azamat Bakoev, that big upset. And he's coming off a knockout loss against Bo Nickel, where at UFC 322, where he was a sacrificial lamb. We know that. But his recent, he submitted Cody Brundage April of 2023. He submitted Armin Petrosian February of 2024. He had a loss to Chris Curtis in what was a 29-28 across the board decision in a fight that took place exclusively like in boxing. So it favored Chris Curtis the way that fight ended up happening. Submitted Dustin Stoltzfus, submitted Saprabag Safarov and Oscar Piachota. Not the best names there, but like he's really good at arm triangles. Most of his wins in the UFC have been by submission, and the only losses have been, 3 of the 4 losses have been to names that you would not, ridicule a guy too hard for losing. Anthony Hernandez, Chris Curtis, Bo Nickel. The only one like that was in his level of like his tier of competition is Petrosky, and that was a close fight. I don't know how it necessarily happens. Like McConaughey, I don't think has ever lost a decision in his UFC career, but I've wanted to be impressed, and I haven't been with his time in the UFC. Rodolfo Vieira minus 305 is kind of shocking for this tier of the middleweight division. I think you could do method of victory double chance and do Vieira like by submission and by decision, and probably get a decent number out of it. I don't think like McConaughey could make things kind of close. I don't like the point spread necessarily. One more note on McConaughey. What was it? All 4 losses are by knockout in grappling competitions. I don't even think he was submitted. He was submitted by against Austin Vanderford in his amateur debut in 2015. He was submitted by arm triangle choke. Now Vanderford is a good grappler, of course, but submission plus 175. That's a tough number to get to for a guy that's never lost professionally by decision or by submission and hasn't lost at all in MMA by submission for over a decade. So, like, by decision plus 200. Now, let's go by submission. Those numbers aren't that different, and I think you still go with how Vieira has ended up winning the vast majority of his fights, especially in the UFC, which with so much more UFC experience, valuable UFC experience than Eric McConaughey has. So yeah, like I don't think there's too many ways to go wrong with Rodolfo Vieira in that combination. I think if it goes to decision, it could be a split, it could be 29-28s, in just one direction or in both. So I'm not picking Rodolfo Vieira to do anything more dominant than possibly landing an arm triangle choke, which is a very good possibility. If you find a prop for Rodolfo Vieira by arm triangle choke, go ahead and do that. Eric McConaughey, I hate to say it.
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Next up, we have a heavyweight matchup between Marcus Buchecha and Ryan Spann. This was a tough one for me to get to as well. I've struggled with how to think about Ryan Spann in total and also as a heavyweight. Ryan Spann is the plus 123 underdog, Buchecha the minus 143 favorite. And to talk about Buchecha first, because he's just 5-2-1 as a professional in MMA and is 36 years old, 6'2, 77.5-inch reach, 4 wins by submission, one by knockout, never one by decision. Both of his career losses are by decision. He was 5-1 in one championship, and obviously a very long and storied and accolade-filled professional grappling career in IBJJF and ADCC. This guy has been a jiu-jitsu champion many times over. And so, people know what he's good at. That's no secret. And it was only up till, like, I mean, it has taken some of the best grapplers in the world to beat Buchecha in just that specific department. His MMA career began in 2021 in one, where all of his other fights took place. He submitted Ji-Won Kang, not bad in one. TK had Simon Carson, but got the heel hook on Kirill Grishenko. Meaningful win there. So Kang, Grishenko, I give credit to those wins. He got the submission over Amir Aliakbari November of 2024 and what was his last fight in one. And the decision loss in one was to Umar Kane, Ruz, who is the current one heavyweight champion. So it's hard to take too much away from Buchecha there either. He loses then in his UFC debut to Martin Buday. And if you will recall and walk back with me on Martin Buday, because this fight was 29-28 on all three judges' scorecards. So 1 round difference, and he could have won that fight. And that would have meant he would have beaten a guy who, by the end of his UFC tenure, because Buchecha was Buday's last fight in the UFC, counting the contender series, was 8-1 in the UFC with just a knockout loss to Shamil Ghazayev. So, I mean, it was right there. It was a close fight, and it was his first fight in the UFC. And then he has the draw against Kennedy and Nchekwu. 28, 28, 28, 28, 28, 28. He ended up with like almost double Kennedy's control time. He actually landed more significant strikes. Kennedy landed more total. Buchecha landed 23 ground strikes. So I don't take too much away from him and not getting that win either, even though Kennedy hasn't won very much at all, even, in his move to heavyweight. Walter Walker was able to submit him. Buchecha wasn't. And so Ryan Spann actually has a bigger reach. He is taller, and he's only a little bit younger. It's just like, what a hard dude to get a read on. At light heavyweight, he kind of emerged. He was on the contender series, and then he got that knockout over Rogerio Nogueira in 2019, which is tough to think about. Like those two existing at the same time and fighting each other at UFC 237, and him, Spann kind of being able to make a little bit more of a name for himself with that. But he got knocked out by Johnny Walker. He got submitted by Anthony Smith, submitted by Nikita Krylov, lost another split decision to Anthony Smith, knocked out by Bogdan Guskov, and then knocked out by Waldo. But then, he has the finish victories over Misha Serkinov, Ian Kudalaba, knocked out Dominic Reyes at UFC 281, which, while being a good win for Spann, was more like rock bottom for Dominic Reyes in the losing streak he had after he fought John Jones. But his last two wins, a guillotine against Lucas Brzeski and a guillotine over OSP. OSP, who even at the time, like less than 2 years ago when they fought, like he was like 40. And Lucas Brzeski is a guy who has won once in the UFC. Hilariously, it was against Walter Walker and Walter Walker's debut. And after the Contender Series in the UFC, he went 1-6. Had his chances, and so that win by Ryan Spann doesn't mean a lot to me. The OSP one doesn't mean as much either. OSP, that was his last fight in the UFC at the tail end of his UFC career. After granted he had beaten Kennedy, but those two wins don't mean a lot to me. I am concerned that like Spann can get taken down and out grappled, which is what Buchecha is going to be looking to do, and that Spann won't be able to land the guillotine, which is how he has won gotten three of his last four wins. Knocking Buchecha out, that's a great choice. Go ahead, but Buchecha knows that that's going to be where he's going to, very vulnerable. He's going to do it whatever he can to avoid it. And I have to imagine that his guillotine defense is very good. I, it's it's hard to pick one of these guys to put a lot of confidence in, but I have to go with Buchecha, who I think like could be on a two-fight winning streak in the UFC, could be 7-1 or whatever it would be. Two very close fight. He's getting older, but he has the size and the dimensions to, counter, Ryan Spann in those areas that he's gifted. And you avoid the knockout. You get like maybe 1 to 3 takedowns, and this fight could be Buchecha's. So on that principle, I'll say Buchecha minus 143 on the money line, I think is fine. I don't love like a spread play there. -3.5 for Buchecha is -105. And I think that, he might be at too much of a disadvantage striking and in just like athletic impressiveness to like, get the points he needs to cover the spread even in a decision. Like method of victory, double chance, Buchecha by submission and Buchecha by decision, because by decision is plus 550. By knockout for Buchecha, it's plus 500. I think that like submission is the most likely, but you're getting a pretty good value there if, by decision plus 550. So that method of victory double chance could actually be better than I would have expected at first. So yeah, Buchecha by submission, Buchecha by decision. Pair both of those together. Money line -143 is fine. Ryan Spann could look like a whole new version of himself in this fight, and then could be back to us wondering if who he could lose to. He's always been a roller coaster guy. But you look back on the resume and you wonder like if even his best wins were him just catching people at the right time. And I think the jury's still out on whether the move to heavyweight was right for him. Maybe, that's a guy too that there's a reason that it'd be good to have a cruiserweight or a Bridgerweight division. Because these guys at light heavyweight, they're feeling like they can go up to heavyweight where, there's going to be some, maybe what you would think is easier wins, especially if you can, you still have gas in your tank past the halfway point of the fight. But once you get past the lower tier of heavyweight and it starts getting to a higher skill level, then you're dealing with a higher skill level. Maybe the gas tank is there. Your gas tank is going to be, challenged more because you're dealing with someone who's bigger. So I don't know about Spann as a heavyweight, and I think if he's able to get this win, I'd feel a lot better about it because Buchecha is legitimately world class as a jiu-jitsu practitioner. And that's a guy, even though he's 36, this is going to be his 9th professional fight. And, all the MMA fights before that happened against, solid competition, both in the UFC and in one championship. So that was a hard one to get to for me. I thought at first glance I was going to like Spann as the underdog, but I'm going with Marcus Pachecha. Hit it. Ryan Spann, just over the last, few years.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
Next up, we have a bantamweight matchup between Montel Jackson and Raoni Barcelos. Montel Jackson is the minus 185 favorite. Randy Barcelos, the plus 160 underdog. Talk about Montel Jackson first. 15-3 as a pro. Born in 1992, has a 75-inch reach as a bantamweight. That's nuts. He was on a 6-fight winning streak before his last fight. Now, the best fighter he beat in that stretch of time was like either Julio Arce, Damon Blackshear, Daniel Marcos, all in that kind of range. He lost by decision to Brett Johns, getting taken down 8 times in that fight, even though he landed a knockdown in that one. Lost by decision to Ricky Simone, getting taken down 7 times. And he lost his last fight by split decision to Davison Figueiredo. That's Figueiredo's one win since August of 2024 when he fought Chito Vera. And yeah, I mean, it was a split decision. It was a close fight. I thought Figueiredo won that fight, but it was a weird, jumps in competition, from Daniel Marcos, but he had put in his time and had that winning streak. But it was a leap up to Davison Figueiredo, even at the stage of Figueiredo's career that it's at. And, he came up short. It was competitive, but he did. And, Brett Johns, Ricky Simone, people that can get him down, even if he's able to hurt them and do well on the feet, it doesn't end up, always going his way. And he can finish people. He knocks people out for sure. But Ronnie Yaya, Damon Blackshear, who is, feast or famine kind of guy, the way that he searches for his wins. The submissions, the scrambling that he goes to, the twister that he landed on Jose Johnson, that's a different animal. The Daniel Marcos fight is the more impressive one to me. But then Raoni Barcelos, all right, born in 1987. He will be 3 inches shorter and will have an 8-inch reach disadvantage. But Raoni Barcelos, all right, he had a stretch where he lost 4 of 5 fights from June of 2021 to August of 2023 to Tamir Valiev by majority decision, Victor Henry by unanimous decision, a fight where there was like 315 strikes, significant strikes landed between the two of them. Had a really nice win over Trevin Jones in the middle, then lost to Umar Nurmagomedov and Kyler Phillips. He was only finished once in that stretch of losses, and that was against Umar Nurmagomedov. He's beaten Syed Nurmagomedov. Having a Nurmagomedov on your resume is always good. But this 4-fight winning streak that he's on now, that he's been on since February 2024, submitted Christian Quinones, beat Peyton Talbot by unanimous decision, getting 8 takedowns in that fight. That was the eye-opening moment for Peyton Talbot. That might have been one of the best things to ever happen to Peyton Talbot's career. Hit the refresh and the accelerator button. But Raoni Barcelos exposed like a very real weakness in Peyton Talbot at UFC 311. It was a very good win. Then he beats Cody Garbrandt by unanimous decision, 29-28 on all 3 scorecards, June of 2025. He is coming off a unanimous decision win over Ricky Simone, 29-28 across the board. That was at UFC Fight Night, November 8th, 2025, the one headlined by Gabriel Bonfim versus Randy Brown. I went Raoni Barcelos here as the plus 160 underdog. I think that's actually, I think Montel Jackson is actually taking money because Barcelos, I think, was at plus 155 earlier in the week. And this is just like a kind of a resume play here where it's been really hard to knock out Raoni Barcelos. It's only happened once in the UFC, and it was to Umar Nurmagomedov. Kyler Phillips got a knockdown in that fight. And it was still 29-28 on two of the three judges' scorecards, and he wasn't able to finish Randy Barcelos. Hell, in the fight with Timur Valiev, Randy Barcelos had two knockdowns, didn't get knocked down, but ends up losing the majority decision. We've seen him be able to strike, excuse me. We've seen him be able to strike with volume, get, you know, volume takedowns when need be. He hasn't done a ton of finishing in the UFC, but I believe two knockdowns and two submissions to his credit. I think that there's Montel Jackson, do your work on the feet. You don't have to hurt Randy Barcelos and stay off the ground, but I think Randy Barcelos can hold his own on the feet, and I think he will be able to get Montel Jackson down to the ground. I think that this will probably end up being a close decision. I think the more likely finish is Montel Jackson by knockout. But, if you're Barcelos, if you land 40 to 80 strikes over the course of the fight, you get 1 to 6 takedowns. I think that's all possible. Then this is like very, very winnable fight. I went with Randy Barcelos plus 160 money line, hit it. And you could go Randy Barcelos by decision. That is plus 225. I don't think you need to do that. I think you can go money line. And I think if you're going to take a method of victory, go Montel Jackson by knockout plus 210. Montel Jackson by decisions plus 165. But Montel Jackson by knockout plus 210, I think, is actually the better value. Or even like maybe Montel Jackson covering the spread is plus 100. No. Think about it. That's how I see that one playing out. I've been favoring a lot of underdogs on these cards over the last month or so, but that hasn't gone too bad. So this is another one like that. And we're getting to another one like bantamweight. Davy Grant versus Adrian Luna Martinetti. Davy Grant is the minus 122 favorite. That might have changed. Yeah, well, look at what my bets were for on Davy Grant if I got him at plus money. But anyway, Grant minus 122. To talk about Martinetti first, 17-1 as a professional, 30 years old, 4 wins by knockout, 6 by submission, 7 wins by decision. His only loss is by decision. And it was, I believe, it was a long time. It was 2017. He lost by unanimous decision to Luigi Quezada at FFC 29. Didn't lose as an amateur either, and fought a lot in FFC. But like only up until like recently, he started fighting for like FFC and UWC titles there in South Latin America. And even in those fights, the opponent's record, now the record is misleading in a bunch of promotions that, are outside of the US. Because a lot of those guys are still dogs and have, good experience and are not easy wins at all. But, 25-10, that's not bad in UWC, but 13-10-1 was his last title fight in UWC. Before getting on the Contender Series, it was an 8-3 opponent in Budo Cento, and then a 0-0 opponent in MMA Mexico Fight Night. Ends up beating Mark Vologden by unanimous decision October 2025 on the Contender Series. I like Vologden, and I think he has a lot more room to grow upward. Is coming off that majority draw with John Castaneda, just like last week. Yeah, that was last week. So, Vologden, that's not a bad win by any means, but like the 17-1 record, and maybe this is why, if the line did flip, why it flipped the way that it did. I mean, to sum up his professional resume before the UFC, his first title fight win in UWC for their bantamweight title in February 2022 was against a 2-3 opponent, Brandon Uruchurtu. and it was by Gogo Plata.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to.
Now, folks, I don't know what some of you know about jiu-jitsu. You know, if you're following MMA enough to where you're listening to this, you know what I'm about to say is that Gogo Platas are not common at all in mixed martial arts. When you get to a certain level, and I don't think they're probably common at any level. You submit a guy by Gogo Plata in a title fight. That's what I mean. Is so much of it. Not to say that Martinetti is not good. You know, the fight with Vologden, I think, shows that, you know, that was a unanimous decision. There was a lot of strikes thrown. It was 29-28. He had 3 minutes, 47 seconds of control time in that fight. He's not a bad fighter, but 17-1 is misleading. So if he started off as a favorite, then people started looking into it. Perhaps that is why Davy Grant took on money if that is what happened. Now, Davy Grant, I feel like I've talked about Davy Grant so many times over the last however long. They're the same height. Grant will have a 2-inch reach disadvantage. He's also a decade older. That's usually not a good thing. But Davy Grant has won 4 of his last 6 fights dating back to May of 2022. Why do I feel like I've talked about him 1,000 times, but he hasn't actually been that active? So the way Davy Grant has lost over the last life, he's been submitted, on the Ultimate Fighter and then by Manny Bermudez. But like when you start getting into like when he was having quality, like started having high quality opponents, he knocked out Jonathan Martinez. He lost by decision to Chito Vera and by split decision to Adrian Yanez in a very close fight. Then finishes Luis Smolka, submits Rafael Asuncao, and his last 2 wins were against Ramon Tavares and then Damone Blackshear, okay, by unanimous decision. 2 losses ago to Daniel Marcos. That was a split decision loss. When I recall thinking should have gone to Davy Grant, but what are you going to do? He's coming off of a first round guillotine loss against Charles Jourdain last October. And maybe not that long ago, that would have been not a good thing to say. But Charles Jourdain is now on a 3-fight winning streak. He just beat Kyler Phillips by unanimous decision in Canada, despite getting taken down 7 times. So that's really not that bad of a loss. Look, Davy Grant is a veteran of the UFC, been around, on the Ultimate Fighter since 2013, and then actually beat Chito Vera in his real UFC debut. He's fought so many high quality bantamweights, and has won 2 of his last 3, going the distance. He can be well rounded too. I think that this is the kind of spot I look for with Davy Grant, and that's why I'm hoping I got him at plus money. But minus 122, I don't hate either. This is one where even if all these I question this guy's resume, fighting a guy with a veteran UFC resume, like the Max Griffin matchup. Maybe not all of them hit, but I'm confident that a couple will, that a decent enough percentage for it to be profitable. So it was give me Davy Grant, money line minus 122, hit it. If I'm picking a specific outcome, like Davy Grant by decision is plus 225, that makes the most sense. And Martinelli, Davy Grant. I don't know, Martinetti. I think it's either like Davy Grant being like 40 years old. It's either that this is the fight where it's like, oh my God, he almost got killed. Martinetti looks like an absolute monster, which could be misleading going into his next fight. Or this goes this will be an adjustment in competition like it was on the Contender Series, and that went the distance, and that was a competitive, fight with a close decision. So we could see a wide range of outcomes if it's a Martinetti win. He could look like an absolute savage, and that could be misleading because it's against a 40-year-old on the tail end of his career. Or it could be a Davy Grant fight. It could be a really tough out, go the distance, and it could end up being a really close fight. Davy Grant by split decision is plus 900. I think that's something to look at too. But there's plenty of guys out there that anytime the line is close or they're an underdog, just based on their skill set and who they get matched up with, I'm gonna like give very serious consideration to and think that it's worth a gamble. Some people that doesn't work out and eventually have to stop. With Davy Grant, it has worked out. Most of the time that I've made that speech with him over the last few years. So that's where I'm going with Davy Grant. I don't have a sound drop from Martinetti, I don't think, because I don't think any of those are appropriate. I need to diversify those. I have too many sound drops right now that are just polarizing, and they don't describe some of the situations I need to play them in. Next up, 3 fights left. Lightweight matchup between Rafa Garcia and Alexander Hernandez. Alexander Hernandez is the minus 125 favorite. Rafa Garcia, the plus 105 underdog. I've never been like a fan, at least personally, of Alexander Hernandez. Rafa Garcia, very interesting case here. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights. The opponents he's lost to in the UFC haven't been that bad. Like Nasrat Haqparast, Chris Gruetzemacher, he got 5 takedowns against Gruetzemacher and still lost the decision, getting outstruck. Lost the decision to Jakar Close. His last loss is a knockout at the hands of Grant Dawson, October of 2024. I couldn't get behind Rafa Garcia. I still have a lot of trouble. I don't see. I was surprised that this line is as close as it is. Now he did get a knockout over Jared Gordon in his last fight, and that goes a long way to legitimizing Rafa Garcia because the 3 wins before that had been Mahashate, who he took down 6 times, Clay Guida. And Clay Guida, even at the time 3 years ago, was north of 40. Clay Guida lost 2 more fights after that. He was coming off a win over Scott Holtzman by split decision. And then Vink Paschal. So it was 3 guys in a row that it's wins that you just don't know what it means for them moving forward. But getting the knockout over Jared Gordon was meaningful because Gordon was coming off the knockout win over Thiago Moises. Jared Gordon's an up and down kind of guy, but, usually pretty consistent. Alexander Hernandez will have a 2-inch reach advantage. He's 2 inches taller. He's just a little bit older by a couple of years. But Alexander Hernandez went through that horrific stretch where nothing was going well for him between February 2022 and April of 2024, where he gets finished by Renato Moicano. He gets knocked out by Billy Quarantillo. He gets a decision win over Jim Miller. And it's that was his first win since he beat Mike Breeden. And by that point, the fight with Drew Dober and the fight with Donald Cerrone were well-distant memories. He fought Cerrone now almost 7 years ago. Just 3 fights into his UFC run. Now, since UFC 307, Alexander Hernandez has won 4 fights in a row. And I know a little bit more about what to make of these wins. Split decision over Austin Hubbard, and then a unanimous decision over Kurt Hollabaugh. Those are 2 guys that have not won very much in the UFC. That's why they were on the season of The Ultimate Fighter that they were on. But they're veteran guys. It got Alexander Hernandez back on a winning stretch. He fought, well-rounded over the course of those 2 fights. Then he knocks out Chase Hooper brutally, and then knocks out Diego Ferreira last September. Rafa Garcia, I'm just not there yet, even after the win over the knockout win over Jared Gordon. Hernandez hasn't had he lost that split decision to Damon Jackson, which I maybe, if I was being fair and wasn't just hating on Alexander Hernandez, thought he should have won. He got a knockdown. Damon Jackson ended up getting 3 takedowns. That was a rough stretch for Hernandez, but this is a similar quality of opponent to the last 4 guys that he's fought. Beating Chase, knocking out Chase Hooper the way that he did was, it was meaningful too. But Chase Hooper kind of had a similar thing in his record, where before fighting Alexander Hernandez, he had beaten Jim Miller in that, was an excellent grappling exhibition. Submitted Clay Guida in 2024. Submission over Slava Claus, Jordan Lee. Like it's a similar run for Chase Hooper, honestly, that Rafa Garcia is on. Just Rafa Garcia doesn't have any hype or, fraud check allegations attached to him like Chase Hooper does. Knockout is on the table. Decision is on the table. I think like if Rafa Garcia gets the win, it is very likely by decision. I think maybe where they do similar things on the feet. Maybe either one of them could land the harder shot of the two. But then, like, if Rafa Garcia gets a couple of takedowns, like Damon Jackson was able to, then I could see him pulling out the decision. I think it's going to be hard for Rafa Garcia to knock out Alexander Hernandez. Alexander Hernandez just looked a lot better. He's always been an athletic, explosive, physical specimen of a dude at lightweight. But he's just looked better over, the last, year and a half or so. This close on the money line, I'm happy to go Alexander Hernandez minus 125. You can do method of victory, double chance, decision, and knockout, and, maybe get a slightly better number there. Hernandez by knockout is plus 300, and by decision is plus 145. So Rafa Garcia by decision, plus 185. I think like Rafa Garcia by split decision, plus 950, very much on the table. But I'm happy to go Alexander Hernandez minus 125. That's a fine number, and it takes some of the guessing out of it. But if you can get a method of victory, double chance, decision, and knockout, and even get like a microscopically better number, I guess go ahead and do it. So, Alexander Hernandez.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
But I do think he's going to win this fight. Next up, the co-main event of the evening, we got Norma Dumont and Jocelyn Edwards at bantamweight. And this one surprised me too when the odds came out. So Norma Dumont's the minus 190 favorite. Jocelyn Edwards, the plus 165 underdog. Jocelyn Edwards has taken a good deal of money, it seems, because I think she started off like plus 230. Like she was in the plus 200s quite easily. It's down to plus 165. So maybe people were seeing what I was seeing early in the week. But Norma Dumont, she's typically a lengthier, bigger middleweight or bantamweight. Not that she's like bulky, but she always has seemed like a lengthy, troubling matchup in the stand-up department. And I love Norma Dumont, and her UFC career has been very good. She also, fought at featherweight a good deal. And at featherweight, like she lost her UFC debut to Megan Anderson. She lost a split decision at UFC 274 to Macy Chiasson, who got 7 takedowns against her, controlled for 7.5 minutes. That was at featherweight. It was split. It was 30-27. 2 of those for Macy, 29-28 by Junichiro Kamijo for Norma. Strange scorecards, but Norma Dumont beat Felicia Spencer and Aspen Ladd at featherweight, and Ashley Evans Smith. She beat Danielle Wolf at featherweight by decision. Every fight for her in the UFC after her UFC debut loss to Megan Anderson has gone the distance, and there's been several close ones, several split decisions. And on this 6-fight winning streak she is on since September of 2022, beat Danielle Wolf, Carol Rosa, even though she got knocked down by Carol Rosa, Chelsea Chandler, Jermaine de Rondemy, who she got down 6 times, decision over Irene Aldana, where she landed 159 strikes, and then a split decision win over Ketlin Vieira November 1st, 2025, 29-28. On all 3 judges' scorecards, just 2 of them went for Norma. So, she is very capable of fighting well-rounded fights. getting takedowns when she needs to. She wins fight even if she gets like hurt on the feet, but she does very well in the stand department in her own right. That's why she's won so many fights that have gone 3 rounds. And against big fighters. Now, Jocelyn Edwards, if you can believe it, she's an inch taller and has a 3 inch reach advantage. She's not 35 years old like Norma Dumont. She is about 5 years younger. And if you ask me, you know, a year or so ago, I don't know what I would have said about ask me after she lost to Eileen Perez, because, it was a pretty mediocre run before it. Like, you lost the decision to Carol Rose in her second UFC fight. You lost to Jessica Rose Clark, too. Went on a 3 fight winning streak against not an awesome, group of fighters, and 2 of them were by split decision. Loses 2 unanimous decisions to Nora Cornole and Eileen Perez. She was taken down 6 times by Eileen Perez and knocked down. Still ended up like controlling for some of that fight, but just not on the ground in a meaningful way. Eileen Perez landed 6 of her 11 takedowns in that fight. Now, since she fought Jocelyn Edwards, she went on to beat Daria Zeleznikovia, Carol Rosa, and Macy Chiasson. So Eileen Perez is right there with the top contenders at women's bantamweight. And Nora Cornole, who Jocelyn was able to get down 5 times in their fight, controlled for almost 9 minutes. And it wasn't even that close of a decision, 230-27. She, in big fashion, ended up avenging that loss just February of this year. So this 4 fight winning streak, after every fight she had ever had in the UFC had gone the distance, and so many of them were close fights. Now she's had 4 finishes in a row, submitting Tamiris Vidal, knocking out Chelsea Chandler, knocking out Priscilla Cachoeira, and submitting Nora Cornole. Um, this is what I'm glad I got it early in the week. I don't know how much. I don't it's getting to a point where I would think about taking Norma, but Norma's still minus 190. I love Norma's track record in the UFC. She's had a fantastic run at women's featherweight and bantamweight. She's one of the reasons I wish they kept women's featherweight around. There's plenty of people of quality that can compete at women's featherweight. They're all just struggling to make bantamweight right now. But Jocelyn Edwards has been on a very nice upward trajectory over the last year and a half. The transition to finishing these people, finishing Chelsea Chandler and Priscilla Cachoeira, finishing Nora in an a fight that had happened just like a few years before that wasn't all that close, and she looked fantastic her last time out. She has the physical advantages to neutralize some of those things that make Norma a difficult matchup. And you get Norma down to the ground, you hurt her. Jocelyn's been unloading, some cannon shots that have been fight changing. So for those reasons, I'm going Jocelyn Edwards money line. Hit it. I just got it at a way better number than plus 165. And I don't think you need to go. I think you need to pick a method of victory. Gun to my head, I would say like by decision is most likely, but the way it's been trending, Jocelyn Edwards by knockout is plus 1,000. Give that a look. That's interesting. As Norma gets up there in age, and Jocelyn has just looked so much better. And it just, it's just like Norma's beaten so many good fighters at 135 and 145 pounds. So yeah, it would be a huge win for Jocelyn Edwards, but I think it's one that's trending in the right direction for her. And now we are to the main event of the evening. And we have a featherweight matchup between Aljamain Sterling and Yusuf Zalal. Aljo is the plus 115 underdog. Yusuf Zalal, the minus 135 favorite. I think Aljo maybe took like a little bit of money, perhaps. Let's talk about Zalal first. All right. he's been trending in the right direction. Talking about someone who has been trending in the right direction since a period of time where they definitely weren't. That's Yusuf Zalal. Um, 3 decision wins to start off in the UFC in 2020, then 3 losses and a majority draw in a row to Ilya Taporia, who did not knock Zalal out. He took him down 5 times. That was how he won that one. Decision loss to Sungwoo Choi, where he got outstruck. Split decision loss to Sean Woodson, and then a majority draw against Damon Blackshear. He has now won 5 fights in a row, mostly by submission. 4 out of 5 by submission over Billy Q, Jarno Arons, Jack Shore. Submitted Josh Emmett in his last fight, UFC 320. Josh Emmett's 40 years old. He's now lost 5 of his last 6 fights to good fighters, but still. And this was like the concern here with Zalal is, yeah, like Billy Q, Jarno Arons, and Jack Shore. Those are nice wins of a similar tier of competition. Then you beat Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett in 2025. Those are nice names to add. It's a good 5 fight winning streak for a guy born in 1996. I just have to wonder how meaningful is that when both of those guys had lost such a big majority of their fights leading up to that, and Calvin Kattar, approaching 50 or approaching 40 as well. Calvin Kattar in total right now has lost 6 of his last 7 fights. And what did I say for Josh Emmett? Lost 5 of his last 6. That's not a good record for those two, biggest wins that you've gotten up to this point. And how were people able to beat Yusuf Zalal back a handful of years ago, back when he actually lost and, then had to make his way back to the UFC? Sean Woodson just kind of does that to people. That was a close fight, but he got outstruck by Sungwoo Choi and taken down a little bit. And Ilya Taporia didn't have to knock him out. He took him down 5 times, controlled him for 8 minutes of the fight. I don't think Taporia didn't even land like any ground strike. Landed 5 of 9 takedowns. Now, Zalal has not been taken down much over the course of this winning streak. Jack Shore got him down twice, but that ended in a second round submission. Now, Aljo, born in 1989. These guys are of similar physical proportion. Zalal is taller, but Sterling just has 1 inch less of reach. And Sterling's record over the last few, to talk about Aljamain Sterling, I saw a post on Twitter or something like that about how underappreciated Aljo is, and that really is the case. 25-5 as a professional. And all 5 of his losses in the UFC took 2 split decision losses back in 2016 and 17 against Brian Caraway and Rafael Sunsao in fights that, at least on paper, it looks like it's like Aljo lost those fights. But then, beat Renan Barao, Brett John, Cody Stamann, Jimmy Rivera, Pedro Munoz, submitted Corey Sandhagen, ends up getting that title fight against Piotr Jan, which he wasn't winning in the 4th round. Doesn't mean he couldn't have won it. He was not winning. Some people might argue that he was. I disagree, but okay. He ends up getting the DQ victory when Piotr Jan hits him with a knee on the ground.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
And then when they run it back, you think like, all right, more of the same. What is Jan going to do to him this time? Just don't hit him with an illegal knee. And he ends up beating Piotr Jan by split decision in a fight that I did think he won. Landed 2 of 22 takedown attempts, but that ended up being a good difference maker. We know Aljo is a really good grappler and just very, he's a shifty, tricky, dynamic dude wherever he's at. But even since when he defended the title he got by DQ against Piotr Jan, then he knocks out TJ Dillashaw, then he beats Henry Cejudo by split decision, only loses the title getting knocked out by Sean O'Malley a few fights after he got the belt. And, you know, if Sean O'Malley doesn't land that one punch, even if like the ref had maybe given Aljo a little bit more time, maybe that, the history of the bantamweight belt looks a lot different. But it doesn't. Aljo lost that fight in the second round, got knocked out, moves up to featherweight, beats Calvin Kattar by unanimous decision. Um, a handful, like 6 months before Yusuf Zalal beat him. Took him down 8 times. That was a unanimous decision. And he's coming off a unanimous decision win against Brian Ortega, outstriking him 124-55, getting 3 takedowns against Brian Ortega, beat him 50-45 on all 3 judges' scorecards.
Oh, God. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
That's a, I mean, that is a dominant. We have seen Brian Ortega, like, he had the submission over Yair Rodriguez February 2024. Like, it's hard to knock a guy who has had the title opportunities that he has, but when he fought Max Holloway for the title, he got wrecked, and beat the Korean Zombie. Gets another shot against Volk after the Ultimate Fighter, gets wrecked. Has the injury against Yair Rodriguez, comes back, avenges it. Now he's lost 2 in a row. That fight against Diego Lopez, 30-27 on 2 and 30-26 on the other, and then got 50-45 by Aljo in wait, that was see fight night Walker versus Zhang. That was 5 rounds. Okay. But so, I mean, the only 2 losses Aljo has had since he got knocked out by Marlon Moraes December of 2017, his only 2 losses in the last 9 years, about, a little less than 9 years, but whatever, considering all the murderers at bantamweight that he beat and the people at featherweight that he beat since then. The only 2 losses he's had was a knockout at the hands of Sean O'Malley and a unanimous decision loss over Movsar Evloev. I keep messing that up. He got 6 takedowns in that fight, 6 of his 8 attempts. Evloev landed 4 of his 5. The control time was near even. Aljo actually landed more significant strikes in the course of the fight. Actually, it landed more significant strikes in the first 2 rounds by a razor thin margin, and then it was even at 4 for round 3. Not a lot of striking action, and the grappling was very even. And we're talking about Movsar, who is 20-0 and has done what he did to Aljo to a lesser extent, or to a greater extent, to pretty much everybody else he's ever fought. Let's say the scorecards, it was 29-28, all 3 of Evloev over Aljo. And, it was a close decision for Evloev over Lerone Murphy in England, but he beat Arnold Allen by unanimous decision with those 5 takedowns. The striking was pretty close there. Beat Diego Lopez with 4 takedowns, but he outstruck him by a greater margin. Dan Ige, kind of the same story. So Movsar did what he does to a lot of people, but he struggled against Aljo. They both weren't able to get off many strikes, and Aljo was, had wrestled and grappled effectively. You can definitely make the argument that Aljo won. At least on paper. Optically, it didn't seem like that at the time, but I think you can certainly make the case that Aljo should have beaten Movsar Evloev. And then if he does, who knows, where he's at right now in the featherweight division, because we know where Evloev's at. And I think the UFC would much rather let Aljo fight for the featherweight title than Evloev, as they've made quite clear with their matchmaking at featherweight over the last year or so. So where I stand with that is like, Yusuf, can you avoid getting taken down, 2 to 5 to 6 over the course of 5 rounds when you've never been in a 5-round fight? You've never been in a main event in the UFC. You've gone the distance plenty of times, but not 5 rounds. And you have to be prepared to do that in this fight with Aljamain Sterling, who has plenty of experience training for and fighting and winning over the course of 5 rounds. And he's not going to be Aljo's not easy to hurt. That's why the only person to knock him out was Sean O'Malley and Marlon Moraes almost 9 years ago. Every decision he's ever lost has been a close decision, two splits, and one 29-28 across the board that you could argue that he won. Beat Piotr Jan twice, technically. Sandhagen. Jimmy Rivera, who without a takedown, and Jimmy Rivera, went on to then, start fighting in BKFC. Aljo is a dynamic character who can fight the kind of fight that he needs to against whatever opponent it is. Aljo is older, born in the 80s. That's not an awesome thing in 2026. Yusuf is on an absolute tear, but the experience advantage here, the questions I have about the quality of Yusuf's five-fight winning streak, even though he's looked incredible, and not to take credit away from him, but this would be a real stamp on it. Because of course you have questions about beating Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett in 2025. I think that, Zalal is obviously very savvy submission artist. He's never knocked anybody out in the UFC. I think he's got one or two knockdowns in total. And how many fights where he's had to strike with huge volume, even over the course of 3 rounds. I think that Aljo presents so many, issues for Zalal that this is one where you'd say like Zalal has so much of the momentum, but I don't think Aljo is lacking momentum here. The biggest knock I can make about Aljo is that, as these guys kind of start like doing podcasting and, going on those things, and like, does it take their attention away from being at their best when it comes to fighting? But end of the day, Aljo's won 2 of his last 3 at featherweight against, against 2 dudes that it's more impressive, he beat Calvin Kattar at UFC 300 when Calvin Kattar wasn't, 6 months older like he was when he fought Yusuf Zalal. He didn't finish him, but then he absolutely dominates Brian Ortega. And again, like if he was coming on, if he had lost the bantamweight title, then won 3 straight fights at featherweight and had beaten Evloev, the judges just gave that to him. Nothing different happened. Just the judges saw it differently. We might be talking about Aljo fighting for a featherweight title. It would be right there. For all those reasons, because Aljo's not, 40. Because what is he? I do the math. I just want to click and see a number. 36. It's not that bad. I always thought about him as a small featherweight when he moved up, but it just doesn't really seem that way. So yeah, like Zalal is clearly a dynamic dude in his own right. He's looked great over this winning streak, but I think Aljo stylistically presents a lot of problems for him. I think Aljo might take more money at plus 115 before this fight actually commences. Give me Aljo money line plus 115. Hit it. If I am going with a method of victory, I would say Aljo by decision. That's plus 235. If you're going Zalal, I would go decision plus 160. And I don't plus 160 doesn't do a lot for me by decision, even though it's the most likely of the two, I think. Total takedowns for Aljo, significant for him to go over 70 and a half significant strikes is plus 160. A little 50-50 on that, but Aljo total takedowns over 2.5 is minus 210. Zalal to get it under 1.5 is minus 270, over 1.5 is plus 210. Yeah. I think those are just appropriately handicapped, is what those are. I could see it being Aljo by split decision too. That's plus 950. But overall, I think Aljo, everything with a plus sign by it for Aljo here makes a lot of sense to me. I get nervous when I end up picking so many underdogs, but I feel the way I feel after talking these out. So, folks, that is all 13 fights of UFC Vegas 116 going down later tonight on Paramount Plus. And let's real quick, I'll tell you what my show you what my DFS lineups were. I don't have to build them here in front of you, thankfully. Yeah, so I'll share my screen. First lineup, all Joe, Jocelyn Edwards, Julia Pilastri, Shalmonte, Rafael Filo, and Lucas Brennan. $200 remaining. Second lineup, Davy Grant, Yusuf Zalel, Jocelyn Edwards, Michelle Monte, Alexander Hernandez, Marcus Buchecha. $100 remaining. Third lineup. And I like to mix it up with the I like to I like to involve both guys in the main event, and at least one lineup each for variation's sake. But I don't like the lineup that I have put together for Yusuf as much as I do the two Sterling lineups. Third lineup, Sterling, Jocelyn Edwards, Randy Barcelos, Sean Montag, Marcus Buchecha, and Rafael Filo. And that's what I got going there. And folks, that is it for episode 208 of the Tap That MMA podcast. Looking forward to UFC Vegas 116. Again, for my picks on all combat sports events coming up, and a discussion of all those things too. Follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on YouTube and Spotify. Also available on Apple Podcasts and Amazon Music. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Check out the recent interlude episodes that I've put out. Go check out Fight Club Crate. Go check out King Arthur Capital Group. I got more interlude episodes scheduled and on the books. Thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week and enjoy this UFC fight night, and peace.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.